because there is nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. Everybody is supposed to be dead, to never say anything or want anything ever again. Everything is supposed to be very quiet after a massacre, and it always is, except for the birds. And what do the birds say? All there is to say about a massacre, things like pooty weet. I have told my sons that they are not, under any circumstances, to take part in massacres, and that the news of massacres of enemies is not to fill them with satisfaction or glee. I have also told them not to work for companies which make massacre machinery, and to express contempt for people who think we need machinery like that.
Hi, I'm Kurt Vonnegut, and you're watching South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now presents these stories. Kurt Vonnegut, one of the world's leading authors, visits a modern-day slaughterhouse called Mozambique. We have a report and interview.
This is a paradise on earth. There could be. Mozambique is. And it's simply the so-called freedom fighters who have made life a perfect hell there.
And we're dreaming of a multiracial Christmas. Anti-apartheid gifts are selling briskly during this holiday season.
So let me show you something here. We have the Sounds of Soweto. Great hit. People love this. It sells like hotcakes.
All these stories and more this week on South Africa Now. First, the news with Fana, Kekana and Carolyn Craven.
Dumelang. Busted. For the first time in recent memory, a former South African policeman has been arrested for death squad murders. Police Sergeant Ferdinand Barnard is accused of involvement in two recent political assassinations, that of SWAPO leader Anton Lubowski and university professor David Webster. Stuart Sender has the details.
The death squad story continues to grab headlines. With the recent arrest of a former narcotics officer, more evidence is added to charges that a police hit squad exists, operating as recently as 2 months ago. This arrest links the hit squads to two recent killings. SWAPO leader Anton Lubowski was murdered in Namibia in September, and activist Professor David Webster was slain last spring. We reported on the protests against the deaths of both men. Webster's funeral became a massive anti-apartheid rally.
Oh God, when will you open the eyes and the hearts of the white community to understand that the arms of all those, the majority, are wide open to welcome you into a new South Africa?
At the time, people in the streets suspected police involvement.
I have got absolutely no doubt that they are responsible.
I think he had information on other right-wing attacks, other vigilante attacks, and I think he was on the point of uncovering a lot of information about vigilante work itself. And because of that, for the first time in his political life, he became a direct and overt threat to the state, and I think that's why they killed him.
Webster himself had just finished a report uncovering covert police activity.
I'm thinking of vigilantes, I'm thinking of death squads, which are unquestionably pro-apartheid. Unquestionably, too, it appears the government and the police seem unable, unwilling, I'm not sure, to prosecute such people. You don't see trials of people who wipe out large numbers of UDF supporters or COSATU supporters, for example. So a young political activist, a black political activist from a township, for instance, has to realize that they are letting themselves in for a whole range of potential actions against them. One definite possibility being the possibility of death.
Now 3 more men, including one current and one former police officer, have been arrested in connection with Webster's murder. And Webster's wife disclosed that her husband was a member of the ANC for 11 years and spied on the South African military, uncovering evidence that Pretoria continued to train Renamo rebels in Mozambique, despite repeated denials. Police defector Coetzee says he will soon go public with all the details. We will have more on the story as it develops. For South Africa Now, this is Stuart Sender reporting.
Press restrictions. Under continuing international pressure, rumors that press restrictions used to censor reporting in and from South Africa will soon be lifted. It was thought that President F.W. de Klerk would announce the end of media restrictions in an address at the Johannesburg Press Club. But for now, the information curtain stays in place, despite de Klerk's claims that ending censorship is at the top of his agenda. Nadia Smith has the story.
Recently, we reported on threats to shut down the New Nation newspaper. The government accuses it of publishing subversive propaganda. Now even Nelson Mandela has gotten into the act by faxing this message of support. Mandela says the paper must not be closed. It was worldwide TV coverage of police brutality that was cited by Pretoria as the reason for press censorship. A South African police official was even quoted as saying that we cannot let anything bad about South Africa get out anymore. The South Africans have said repeatedly that they believe media restrictions have achieved the goal of reducing negative coverage.
I think there's been almost a sea change in the coverage we are receiving. And I think there are serious and good journalists writing today who are getting beneath the surface, beneath the foam, as it were, and writing some really rather remarkable pieces on what is happening in South Africa. We're not scared of criticism. We are, shall I say, unhappy about unreasonable criticism.
But what would it mean to end press censorship? South Africa Now spoke with media critic Alexander Cockburn of The Nation and The Wall Street Journal in New York, promoting his new book on the Amazon.
The thing that affects coverage and makes coverage intelligent or perceptive or investigative is not necessarily just that you can get in or out of the country. It's the question of what mindset and preoccupations you bring to it. The US press, in many ways, has always been completely ludicrous on South Africa, has a very narrow focus on what's really involved. They have almost no understanding of, I think, what kind of political revolutions are necessary or possible. So the fact that now they wave in a team from CBS or a New York Times reporter doesn't mean the coverage is going to improve. You know, the slightest move by the South African government, they say, at last the new light is dawning. You know, suddenly over the horizon of oppression has emerged the new day. It's a view of apartheid. If you can virtually, as it were, take a photograph of, a white hand and then a black hand, and you can say, together at last, which, of course, avoids the fundamental premise of the African National Congress, of the movement, which is, it's a matter of what economic system you're talking about. What is the real nature of exploitation in South Africa? What is the real underpinnings of apartheid? The US mainstream press never looks at that.
In the coming weeks, other analysts will present their views on what the repeal of media restrictions would mean for South Africa. This is Nadia Smith for South Africa Now.
In a news update, the FBI tells South Africa Now that the agency is still investigating the suspected poisoning of South African church leader Frank Chiakne. Chikane nearly died during a visit to the United States, and it is believed that his luggage had been laced with a deadly chemical.
At least 4 Americans and several Angolans were killed when a Central Intelligence Agency cargo plane loaded with military supplies for the U.S.-backed UNITA rebels crashed in Angola. The State Department says the cause of the November 27th crash is unknown. The CIA has continued to supply millions of dollars in aid to UNITA, despite a ceasefire agreement between the Angolan government and UNITA signed last June in Zaire. That agreement has since broken down, though UNITA leader Jonas Savimbi announced this week that he would agree to renew the truce. Reports say the Angolan government is wary due to repeated violations of the original ceasefire by UNITA. In Namibia, the process of nation-building continues. Joseph Diescho has the update in this week's Namibia Watch.
The voting in Namibia was certified as free and fair, but an American lawyer whose organization monitored the process says it was hardly up to American standards, but nevertheless a triumph.
Well, I really do believe that it was one of the most moving experiences that I've had. To get to the polling stations at 7 o'clock in the morning and find that there are thousands of people who were lined up there since 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, many of whom walked miles barefoot to get there. Pregnant women, 80, 90-year-old men and women, a lot of blind people, people crippled and infirmed who had to be literally carried to the polls by their friends and relatives. 60% of the people were illiterate. For as many as maybe 40% of the people, when they marked an X on a ballot by the party of their choice, it was the first time they'd ever held a writing instrument in their hand. But all of these people came fully dedicated, very serious about their participation in this process and the importance of it. It's something we rarely see in the United States, that kind of committed voter participation.
With the Constituent Assembly still hammering out a new constitution, the work of forging a free nation has just begun.
One thing that's very important is that the majority party, SWAPO, has called for reconciliation among all sectors of the society. There's been a very bitter war that's been waged in Namibia over the past 23 years. The South African military occupation forces there have conscripted Namibians into their army to fight against their own brothers, their own cousins. Now is the time for reconciliation, and SWAPO believes that that is primary on its list of priorities. Then there's a question of economic independence from South Africa. It's very important, I think, for the international community to keep in mind that a successful election is only a prelude to real independence in Namibia. There are a lot of obstacles in the path of the new government, and it's going to take continued vigilance and pressure by the international community to assure that South Africa does not sabotage the independence that is allowed to go forward in Namibia.
This is Joseph Diescho with Namibia Watch.
In other news updates, earlier this year we reported on efforts by activists in Minneapolis to save Leviacamp, a squatter community scheduled for destruction and the forced removal of its residents. We showed how a sister city project could make a difference. Now it's official. Leviacamp will not be moved, but will be legalized, and says the nearby local white government will actually be upgraded.
And in the United States, members of the book publishing industry held a press conference to present findings that a book boycott of South Africa is hurting children in that country. Following a recent trip to South Africa, the publishers said they found no support for such a boycott. Many cities and states that have passed divestment laws will not buy books from companies doing business in South Africa. The publishers want a special status.
It seems almost trivial to focus on the availability of books in libraries in a country with such a notorious record for brutally repressing the aspirations of its majority population. Yet the long-term significance of our, meaning the U.S., unwitting complicity in South Africa's censorship of ideas and information is just too compelling to ignore. Not one person we interviewed, black or white, could find reasons to support a boycott of books and educational materials.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut is one of the great anti-war novels of our time. And now the author has traveled to southern Africa to see a contemporary version, Mozambique. Thanks to a grant from USA for Africa, we can present the first in a new series of stories about the prospects for peace in that region. When celebrated author Kurt Vonnegut accompanied the international relief agency CARE on their recent visit to Mozambique, he witnessed these scenes of starvation. The people he met are not lining up for handouts as a result of natural disasters, but are without homes or food because of a 14-year guerrilla war.
Before I went, as most Americans I talked to here in New York City assumed that it hadn't rained there for years, or that these people had overbred, or that the whole place was turning into a desert. And of course, this is a paradise on earth. There could be. Mozambique is. It's about twice the size of California, very much like California, and with half the population of Tokyo. And it's simply the so-called freedom fighters who have made life a perfect hell there.
These so-called freedom fighters, the Mozambique National Resistance, Renamo, were allegedly petty criminals and collaborators, recruited by the Rhodesian government to terrorize the newly independent Mozambique. More recently, equipped by the South African government, Renamo has killed over 100,000 civilians and displaced over 1.5 million Mozambicans. What does Renamo do? Were you able to see any of the towns and villages where Renamo had been? What do they do when they come into a town?
Well, there wouldn't be anything to see, as they burn it down, and of course the dwellings are flammable, easily flammable anyway. But they attack the refugee centers, so you don't have to go out to the farms where the people were driven off in the first place. But even in the refugee centers, which again are just people huddled together, they build very simple houses, because Renamo will come in and burn them down, steal the pots or bust the pots, rape people, kidnap children, and the Mozambican army is just nothing. And you go to these refugee centers and you see slit trenches, machine gun nests and stuff like that built, but the Mozambican army, being just children like most soldiers anyway, will run off into the bush too, which is all there is to do.
Vonnegut visited the district of Pibani, which contains the largest concentration of displaced people in the country. The village of this woman, Amina Magiga, was raided by Renamo, known as bandits by the local population. The bandits killed her husband and 3 of her children, forcing her remaining son to join their forces. After such raids, some roamed the countryside for weeks in search of a hospital, such as this one in Maranhão, or a refugee center. This 15-year-old girl arrived with her mother at the refugee center in Ile, only to die before the CARE delegation left.
There was death all around us. The roads are impassable because of Renamo, what some people have called freedom fighters, and CARE, and none of the other relief agencies can truck food in because the roads are mined and there are ambushes along the roads, and I mean, any truck that dares to move in the countryside gets shot up, planes get shot at, boats get shot at. So there are over 1 million refugees now in so-called refugee centers, but which are little towns, usually on the order of Kokomo, Indiana, maybe, where there will be tens of thousands of people driven off their farms with no way to support themselves, no way to feed themselves. And so the relief agencies have to fly in everything.
In fact, the day Vonnegut visited the refugee center at Ile, 10,000 people lined up expecting to receive rations. But because the truck routes had been ambushed, food arrived for only 2,000 people. The sick receive food in a corner of the camp. Then it's first come, first served. For some Mozambicans, relief doesn't come soon enough. For others, the refugee centers are being developed as new farmland. But 2 days after CARE and its video crew left Banabe, the settlement was ravaged by Renamo bandits. What should Americans do about this war?
Well, I would like to make good use of the CIA, unambiguously good use of the CIA, and have them find out, in fact, who is now bankrolling Renamo. The Mozambican army is not strong enough to get these people, to put them out of business. So I think the world has to put Renamo out of business.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
With the holiday season fast approaching, we weren't at all surprised to find a variety of anti-apartheid gift items on the market. Jay Weiss tells us what's available.
Now, these presents aren't exactly in the big department stores, but here in beautifully designed specialty shops, like the Island Trading Company in Lower Manhattan, there's a market for anti-apartheid gifts.
The Island Trading Company carries merchandise from third world countries, Africa and South Africa. We are very popular with the people in the area, and one of the most popular items are the protest t-shirts from South Africa with the anti-apartheid slogans on the front.
The t-shirts in stock will soon be joined by one advertising a certain TV show. South African music is also on sale at this shop in Harlem.
So let me show you something here. You know, we have the sounds of Soweto. Great hit. People love this. It sells like hotcakes. Last but not least, Mashatini and the Mawatela Queens. Fantastic group. Keep the cash register ringing, and we love it.
Now these folks are getting into the business too. This is an African National Congress military unit on a training maneuver. In London, the ANC has a merchandising operation. It is the brainchild of Dennis Goldberg, who spent 23 years in a South African prison. They sent us this whole box of the ANC's new product line. They say if you buy these products, you can support their movement and take a stand. And they've got gifts for people of all ages. They've got a lot of warm things like this muffler, and a hat, and gloves, all in the distinctive ANC colors. They've got a lot of things for kids too, like these t-shirts. And for more distinctive formal wear, they've even got an ANC tie with the ANC emblem on it. These items and gifts from other movements are not yet available in the United States. But South African critic Mark Gevisser tells us about holiday gift books which do shed light on the struggle for freedom in South Africa. They make great presents, and they're available in bookshops everywhere.
There's really nothing to replace reading a good book to get your fingers into what's happening in South Africa. And it's Christmas time now. It's time to, you're going to have some time to read, and you're looking for gifts. And if you're interested in South Africa, there's a lot of stuff you can read. There's so many books that have come out recently. Here's a book by a gangster called Dagmar Boetie, a one-legged guy who, he starts off the book by telling us how he pushed his mother into the fire. And it gives us the idea of the sense of the life of a Tsotsi in South Africa. It makes great reading. There's another book of memoirs by a gangster called Sophia Town by Don Matero, who was a gangster who became involved in the liberation movement when he started protecting ANC women who were canvassing on his turf. And this book's dog-eared because I took it to the beach with me. You know, it makes really compelling reading and gives you a sense of personal life in South Africa. David Goldblatt is perhaps South Africa's most famous photographer, and this is an incredible series of photos he did. What he did was, you know, there's a lot of black people in South Africa live hours and hours and hours away from their place of work, and he traveled the buses with people who were going from KwaNdebele to Pretoria and Johannesburg every morning at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and just spent months and months photographing these people. It was an exhibition at the Market Theatre, and it's a wonderful book as well. All the books I've shown you have been produced by the brightest and most exciting minds in South Africa. And the irony is that most of them, or a lot of them, can't even be read in South Africa. And we're in a very lucky position over here to be able to read these incredible narratives. So take advantage of it this Christmas for yourself and for your friends.
There's even a couple more things. This great new calendar is from the Interracial Open School in Johannesburg, with paintings and essays by young students. And finally, just for fun, in the Harvard Lampoon, they have a photograph of an imaginary game called Sun City, except the kid doesn't seem to want to play. For South Africa Now, this is Jay Weiss reporting.
We are grateful for all the viewers who have been responding to our financial crisis, and we are pleased that we now have 70 stations carrying our show. If you'd like more information about the issues we cover, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund. Next week, we'll take an inside look at AMSCO, the South African government weapons giant. Involved in some of the most secretive arms trading in the world, we call it Lethal Weapon 3. Thank you for watching us. On behalf of everyone at South Africa Now, I'm Fana Kekana. See you next week.
Maida